Welcome, everyone, to today's Explainer. We are going on a really fascinating deep dive today into the very architecture of our minds. Have you ever wondered why your brain simply refuses to let some things go, like a dog with a bone? Well, today we're going to explore a massive cognitive glitch that dictates our focus, our memory, and our productivity. And more importantly, we're going to learn exactly how you can actively hack it. Okay, picture this. You finally close your laptop after an exhausting day. You lay down, but your mind is just racing. Why does an unfinished email keep you awake at night? We've all been there, right? That half-finished report, a draft you didn't send, or a project that's sitting at, say, 85% completion. They just relentlessly circle through your thoughts. It steals your sleep, it fragments your focus. But here is the crazy part. What if I told you this isn't a sign of poor discipline at all? It's actually a highly predictable biological mechanism. There's this wildly relatable confession from a Reddit user that hits the nail on the head. They wrote, "Stop finishing your study blocks on a perfect note. Leave a mess for the next day." I mean, it sounds completely counterintuitive, doesn't it? We are constantly taught to wrap things up neatly. But this user discovered that the absolute hardest part of working is the friction of just starting, staring down that terrifying blank slate. By intentionally leaving a mess, they stumbled upon this really powerful concept of strategic incompletion. To understand why this works so brilliantly, we got to look at the psychology behind it. Which brings us to Section 1, the unfinished task glitch, and unpacking the Zeigarnik Effect. So this glitch is formally known as the Zeigarnik Effect. It's a psychological phenomenon where people remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks significantly better than completed ones. Whenever you start a task, your brain establishes what psychologists actually call a psychic tension or a quasi-need. Essentially, just initiating the work creates this active mental loop that is desperately craving closure. And until that task is resolved, it stays active, chewing up valuable bandwidth in your working memory. The discovery of this glitch is actually such a great story. Back in the 1920s, a psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik was sitting in this bustling Berlin cafe. She noticed something genuinely extraordinary about the waiters there. They could remember these massively complex, unpaid orders perfectly without writing a single thing down. But the very second the bill was settled, poof, the memory was completely gone. Through rigorous experiments, she found that we actually have a 90% better recall for interrupted tasks compared to completed ones. Once the task is finished, that tension is released and your brain simply discards the information. So, how does this actually manifest in our daily lives? Well, these open loops cause those intrusive racing thoughts we talked about. Because your brain keeps the task active, it entirely disrupts your restorative sleep. In fact, research shows unfinished tasks can maintain elevated cortisol levels over an entire weekend. It fragments your focus when you're trying to do totally unrelated things. And amazingly, it even affects your vision. Recent studies show our visual perception will spontaneously prioritize looking at unfinished shapes over finished ones. This glitch is wired incredibly deep into our biology. So let's use it. Section 2, Hacking Procrastination with Cliffhangers. Remember our Reddit user who said to leave a mess? This is where we introduce a game-changing technique, the intentional cliffhanger. Try this out. Write half a sentence or set up the variables for a complex problem, and then just walk away. Literally, just stop. When you return the next day, you're returning to an itching brain. By stopping mid-sentence, you completely bypass the paralyzing fear of the blank page. Your brain absolutely hates that the sentence is unfinished, so when you sit back down, it takes almost zero willpower to resume. You're just picking up a dropped thread. The absolutely crucial point here is that just starting is everything. And this brings us to the 10-minute rule. If you're procrastinating on something massive, do not focus on finishing it. Just commit to 10 minutes of work. That's it. Because your brain dislikes unfinished business, initiating the task instantly creates that psychic tension we talked about. It builds a psychological momentum that will almost always sustain your effort far beyond those initial 10 minutes. You're essentially tricking your brain into wanting to keep going. And get this, it even applies to how we learn. We usually think powering through to mastery in one giant sitting is the best way to study, but the research strongly points to strategic incompletion. If you deliberately interrupt your study sessions before you reach complete mastery, it actually facilitates deeper encoding. Because that Zeigarnik tension lingers, your brain actually keeps the material mentally active between your sessions. This leads to vastly superior long-term memory formation compared to just cramming it all at once. All right, moving on to Section 3, Earning Permission to Forget and Protecting Your Focus. Now, obviously, we can't leave everything unfinished forever, or our brains would literally explode with intrusive thoughts. Researchers Massacampo and Baumeister wanted to know how to relieve the cognitive burden of unfinished tasks without actually having to finish the task right then and there, and they discovered something brilliant. If you simply formulate a highly specific plan for exactly how you will complete the unfulfilled goal, you completely eliminate the cognitive interference. The plan itself acts as a proxy for completion. The reason this works is that a specific plan transfers control over to your automatic system. When you specify exactly how, when, and where you're going to complete a task, you give your brain what psychologists call permission to forget. It perfectly satisfies your mind's need for closure. Your brain basically says, okay, cool, we have a reliable system to handle this later, and it immediately reallocates all those cognitive resources back to whatever you are actually trying to focus on right now. Another brilliant way to manage this burden is through micro-completions. Massive, monolithic projects represent massive, terrifying open loops, and those cause severe mental exhaustion. But if you chop those huge projects down into tiny, independent segments, it totally changes the game. Breaking down the open loop provides you with regular closure experiences. Every single time you cross off a micro-completion, you trigger a dopamine release. This neurochemical reward builds incredible motivation and completely prevents the cognitive overload of maintaining one massive unfinished task. Let's look at the full picture now in Section 4, Mastering the Open Loop and the Dark Side of Incompletion. Because let's be real for a second, any powerful tool has its risks. Yes, open loops give us motivational momentum, they boost memory retention, and they set us up for amazing dopamine hits when we use micro-completions. But there is a very real dark side. If unmanaged, accumulated, unfinished tasks increase your cortisol levels. They severely impair your sleep. They cause anxiety and constant rumination. And this is especially true for high achievers or folks with a really high need for cognitive closure. For them, a messy, unfinished task list doesn't trigger motivation. It triggers severe anxiety. So we absolutely have to use these hacks responsibly to avoid burnout. So how do we protect our mental architecture while doing this? First, you must externalize your tasks. Write them down in notebooks or digital planners. The simple physical act of writing it down suspends the brain's frantic drive to remember the goal. Second, set really clear, deliberate stopping points. Third, aggressively reduce how many concurrent open loops you have running at once. Please don't try to juggle 20 projects. And finally, recognize your own individual differences. If leaving tasks unfinished makes you panic, lean heavily into that specific planning technique we discussed earlier to give your brain that crucial permission to rest. I want to leave you with a question to seriously consider today. What task are you going to intentionally leave unfinished? Are you going to stop writing mid-sentence to give your brain an easy starting point tomorrow? Or are you finally going to write down a highly specific plan for that one project that's been keeping you up at night so you can earn your permission to forget? The architecture of your mind is incredibly powerful, and now you've got the tools to hack it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will see you in the next one.